Today's Pathways Forum will have a specific focus on ocean. And this was a program that was suggested by and developed in collaboration with the Ocean Can. This is one of Future Earth global research networks. The Ocean Can really seeks to create innovative approaches to collaborating, working to build bridges across networks, languages, disciplines, borders, and more. And what they mean with this is finding new ways of engaging stakeholders, moving away from, I guess, traditional modes of research and creating incentives for non-scientists to participate in research, so more transdisciplinarity oriented. We are also very fortunate to have with us three researchers with varied profiles and projects that they will be presenting today. Alexandre Ganachaud, Leopoldo Gerhardinger, and Victor Brun. I'll briefly introduce them now before they complement these introductions in case they are lacking in any way. But Alexandre Ganachaud is from IRD. He works with the Pacific community on the vulnerability of Oceania's fisheries to climate change. He's currently involved and leads the PACPATH project, which is a transdisciplinary pathways-oriented research project aiming to contribute to ocean sustainability. And he will tell us more about it today. Our second speaker will be Leopoldo Gerhardinger from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. He has been conducting transdisciplinary research using a networked knowledge to action approach focused on pathways toward structural changes in marine governance systems in Brazil. And finally, our third speaker will be Victor Brun from CREOB. He is currently conducting research in the Philippines on the participatory processes through which local NGO Sulubay works with local villages to create community-managed marine protected areas. So thanks to the three of you for being here today. I very much look forward to your presentations and to the discussions that are about to take place. And just before we get into the presentation part of the webinar, let me give you a brief overview of the session. So we will start with presentations from, in the order, Alexandre, Leopoldo, and Victor. Each presentation will be followed by 5 minutes for clarifying questions. And the second part of the webinar, we will engage in an open discussion, but that will invite more, I guess, wide-reaching questions from you, from all of the participants. We also have a couple of questions prepared regarding the complementarity between different pathways approaches at different scales, and about the positionality of researchers in long-term transformations-oriented research. Do you have any questions regarding the program of the webinar? If not, Alexandre, I give the floor to you for your first presentation, and you feel free to share your screen whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Gilles, and thanks to you and Nathalie for this invitation to present PACPATH to this ocean forum. So do you see my screen? Is it shared properly?
Yeah, it works perfectly. Thank you.
Very good. So I am a physical oceanographer initially. I've been doing cruises. This is why I have a helmet here on the little picture, and documenting the ocean currents and their role in climate in the Southwest Pacific. And then I become interested in transdisciplinarity. So I am leading this project with my co-leaders. So my co-leaders are Elizabeth Holland, who is professor of the Ocean and Climate Change program and director of this program in the South Pacific in Suva in Fiji, and Jérôme Aucun, who is oceanographer and head of the Pacific Community Center for Ocean Sciences at the South Pacific community. So I'll give a brief overview on the PACPATH program. As you will see, it's very new, this concept in this field. So a little bit of background. That will be fast because I think everybody knows well about the Belmont, this Belmont initiative. And I prepared 2 slides in the end about scaling and ethics, because that was in the conversation when we designed the project. So ocean challenges in Oceania, the health of the ocean and the service it gives is invaluable. As you know, our ocean is suffering. What will it be 10 years from now is very uncertain. And what ocean we will leave to the future generations. You see here pictures. Fish is a very important resource for the Pacific Islanders. So this is really food security. And on the right, you see the effect of marine heat waves. Marine heat waves is the same as atmospheric heat waves, such as the one we are having in Europe, and you are having in Europe. And but it's in the sea, in the ocean, and the effect can be a massive stranding of fish. It is also coral bleaching. And this can mean a death of an ecosystem and a loss of all the protection that coral can bring, and food security also. So that was just an example. And in IPCC report, in the most recent ones, they really point out about the urgency of actions. And you might see the bold sentence here: animals' tolerance thresholds are being exceeded, driving mass mortalities. It's already occurring today. It identifies corals and food and water insecurity, especially in small islands. And in May 2022, we had 91% of the Great Barrier Reef sites in Australia that bleached. So we are really in there. And locally here, Pacific Island representatives do not talk any longer about climate change. They talk about a climate crisis, given the stakes and what is going on. So I think I can go through this. One of the objectives was to serve SDG 14 on the ocean. And the ocean decade, it may be less familiar to everyone. So the United Nations decided to declare a decade where we put everything in place so that we ensure that science delivers the greater benefits to the ocean ecosystem and to society. And this started last year. So I don't think it's useful to go through what the Belmont Forum is. I'll just go through the objective of this project. So the idea is to co-construct ocean research projects and socio-environmental indicators. So the first thing is to establish a common understanding of the ocean, so its state, variability, and change at local and regional scales. There are a lot of networks already existing in the Southwest Pacific, institutions, organizations. So the idea is to reinforce those for specific subjects, to support the governance, the policy making, and integrate the traditional, local, and scientific knowledge all together. As you might guess, Oceanian people who have been living near the ocean for many generations have allowed to teach scientists about the way they see ocean, the way they face extreme events, they face crises, because they have been facing those for many generations. So recently we decided on the main topics, priority topics we will address with stakeholders. So we decided with stakeholders on these topics. So that will be sea level rise, heat waves, and coastal erosion and risk. And given those main topics, we will take into consideration those aspects like conservation, using leverage points, ecosystem-based management, indigenous local knowledge, policymaking, equity, and pollution. Maybe I should say leverage points is the approach where we look for, in how the system is organized, we look for what leverage do we have to transform efficiently a system. So the approach is based on 5 main topics. So you don't have to read those because I have 1 slide per topic. So SDG, actors, who are the actors, indicators, how can we design those, the governance, and an overall package about how to co-construct. So the first approach is to understand how our SDG projects in Oceania. How is it locally felt, understood? What is really important to the population? How those local understanding align with this SDG, and what is perceived as a threat? And this is work led by Karina von Schuckmann, who is oceanographer and international expert, Elizabeth Holland, whom I presented in the beginning, and they're both IPCC co-authors. So rather than talking too much about the method, I would like to go through this example of what can be done. And this is a kind of scaling. We are supposed to talk about scaling because SDG, as they are today, are thought on an international, global scale. And now we are talking about what is interesting, what is of interest at local scales. And this was done on Aruba Island in the Caribbean, an analysis of how those SDG relate with each other. And look at that, this all points to acidification of the ocean. And it's an analysis of the co-benefit. You don't have to go through every single spaghetti here, of course. But one of the main conclusions of this study is that if you want to advance on one SDG target, you need to advance on a certain number of other SDG targets. So this is what they call the co-benefit. For instance, if you want to move on with ocean acidification, improve that, you will have to move on with marine pollution. So why I'm talking about that? First of all, because this study was conducted through a series of workshops over more than 1 week with the local actors, the stakeholders of this island. So it's not like an academic thought, it's what the actors, the manager felt about how the things are linked and how do they work for this island. And the second is that it comes to my second work package, the actors. Who are the actors, the networks and their relationship? So let's stick to the right part of this slide here, still in the Aruba Island, based on the previous analysis with that workshop. Scientists analyzed the different services, governments, institutions that had to do with SDGs and proposed and provide this kind of analysis and propose different possibilities of working in a coordinated way to the same actors. So those same actors could better understand how did their institution work at one point and how it could be improved so that services work with each other, do not wait for each other, and do not do the same task twice. So it's a global analysis. And this is the second aspect of the PACPATH analysis, is to understand those actors. So what are the structures that manage SDG ocean targets? What are the gaps, the overlaps, and who are the key stakeholders? With in mind that we want to be able to transform better what is going on. And yes, most important, this is led by Louis Sellier and Klaus Eisenbach from Gehrig Climate Service Center and Humboldt University in Berlin, both in Germany. The third aspect is to co-design indicators. What is relevant, how we can fit them, what are the gaps, how can do research address them. And this is led by Chris Kesley from University of Maryland and Sebastian Farsi from Germany again, the Center for Tropical Marine Research. And an indicator maybe for an oceanographer like I am, ocean temperature in a given region. And I can do that within a research project. The thing is that we have many indicators that are not used for many reasons. And one of the key here is to co-design the indicators with the actors. And this is an example in the Mississippi watershed, which is about 2/3 of the United States, where the Mississippi Authority asked HIS in particular to create this co-design of indicators. And it includes economy, recreation, water quality, etc. So it's a socio-environmental report indicator. And you will see here, for instance, gross domestic product per sector is an important indicator. At the table, there were in total 400 participants over 3 years. So it was a big effort to converge with those indicators. And some participants, it could be representative of chemical manufacturers and association for the environmental protection. So they would have antagonist interest. But nevertheless, they came up with those indicators. And it has the advantage of being a really useful indicator because it was co-created based on real needs. And also it has the advantage of putting at the same table different actors with different powers and different visions. And when there is a crisis, they will understand each other, at least each other's legitimacy. So that's a good start. And so they did the same thing in the Samoa, American Samoa. So the fourth aspect of the study is to better understand policymaking. There is a lot of work to dig up what is policymaking already doing to address sustainable development goals. That is led by Pierre-Yves Lemeur from IRD Nouméa, the same institute as I am in. How is climate change governed in the Pacific, and how is the plurality of knowledge registers taken into account? It also means the traditional aspect, the local vision of how we can regulate things. And the five approach is about how to interact in transdisciplinarity. And it's led by Maria Manes-Costa from the Climate Service Center in Germany, and Maria Richer from the Faculty of Sustainability in Lufana, Germany. I will just go through that quickly because I think I am out of time soon. So the partnership is here. So it includes, I'm out of time. It includes stakeholders from Europe, academic stakeholders, and also a university in New Caledonia, one in Fiji, and different regional organizations. I will very quickly go through the scalability. One question we could have is, does an analysis such as we propose, will it be specific to one island or part of an island, and what is scalable to another island, a bigger island, a region? So our partners are really interested into that because they might use same methods for other places. And the second is ethics. And there is a very interesting, inspiring paper about ethical considerations of unanticipated consequences associated with ecological forecasting for marine resource. And a very good hints of how to avoid having negative unanticipated consequences when we move forward and we do some forecast in ecosystem for marine resources. And I think I stop here for the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for this presentation. I would like to invite any questions from the audience regarding the presentation specifically or the PACPATH project, whether they are clarifying questions or questions in order to have a deeper understanding of the implications of the project.
No, I hope it was not too clear or so unclear that...
if there are no questions, then because you skipped rather quickly the part on scalability, perhaps you can discuss that a bit more, revisit that aspect of your presentation.
Sure, what a simple scalability issue that if we do indicators on global scales, like many of those are done in IPCC, for instance, we may miss very important issues revealed by local experience. For an example, take the coral. The coral reefs are sensitive to temperature, and when the temperature is too high for too long, the coral will start to bleach and then to die if it goes too long. So we can think of an indicator. We can create an indicator from satellite temperature data, but locally, because of the reef scale, you can have currents that are different, and the temperature will be different, either hotter or colder. And it will maybe depend on the wind, on the tide, on whatever mixing you didn't expect. So this is scalability. You can just scale things up and down. Mm-hmm. And another aspect is cultural. What is felt going on in a place in, let's say, in Polynesia, French Polynesia, or Samoa, with a Polynesian culture, may be very differently felt or maybe regulated in a Melanesian country. So you just have, you cannot make general rules. So the idea here is to find a common aspect that may be scalable, that the common aspects of a problem that could be used in both places, and the ones that are different that cannot be common.
So essentially, you are looking for some elements of consensus potentially between different areas, depending on the specific contexts, but also recognizing that there might be key differences in the way the solutions could be implemented.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any questions from our participants today for Alexandre?
I know we have on board Louis Cellier, who is one of my co-author and leader of PACPATH. So if we have questions for Louis.
Okay, so maybe questions will come later, and because Alexandre, you will have to leave us after the end of the first hour of the webinar due to
yes. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So during the discussion part, if Louis, you're still with us, and perhaps you'll be able to address some of the questions related to PACPATH. Thank you very much, Alexandre. I'd like to invite Leopoldo now for his presentation.
Hello. Hi, Gilles. Hi, everyone. You have my slide on board?
Yep.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this exciting session. I want to share with you a summary of an action research program I've been involved with. We explore transformational narratives, speaking of how networks may improve our capacity to govern the ocean. Just get it slightly. So we are all aware of the need for sustainability science to confront the complex challenges of ocean governance in the Anthropocene, like how to respond to blue acceleration. Sustainability transition labs offer a way forward. I will offer an example of a lab's approach in Brazil I've been engaged with. So Brazil has a huge ocean area that the Brazilian Navy calls the Blue Amazon. And immense capacities are needed to govern this vast ocean. Our lab focuses on civil society organizations who traditionally have low capacities and opportunities for maintaining solid ocean advocacy campaigns in Brazil's capital city, Brasilia, which is very far from the sea, yet where most national ocean policy decisions and sectoral lobbies plays out with poor direct participation of marine civil society networks. So in Brazil, ocean governance is hierarchically led by CIRM, the Interministerial Commission for Sea Resources. This is a long-standing forum in Brazil, hosted by the Brazilian Navy, the liaison of high-level representatives of different Brazilian ministries with a stake on ocean affairs. CIRM's mandate includes dozens of formal working groups, 2 of special interest to our conversation today. GIGERCO, the Working Group for Coastal Management Integration, was the only place across all interministerial commission where environmental conservation organizations had a voice in CIRM systems since 1997. GIGERCO had been dissolved in 2019 and never resumed operating the Bolsonaro presidency area. The other working group is a high-level think tank to advance marine spatial planning in Brazil and formed only by highly ranked ministerial representatives. Our lab accelerated with the successful fundraising and launching of the Brazilian Ocean Horizon 4-year program in 2018, hosted by the Brazilian Future Ocean Panel, PANELMAR. PANELMAR is a network of networks that have been facilitating improved interactions among civil society organizations and state agencies in the Brasilia capital since 2015. The program builds capacities around ocean governance system change by enabling leadership of early career ocean professionals to flourish in the interface of ocean knowledge and policy. We challenge ourselves. Can one be a catalyst and help accelerate transitions to inclusive and ecosystem-based ocean governance? So the program revolves around yearly inter-network seminars where participants come together online and in person to jointly design inter-network action research plans, envisioning activities that will be co-produced in the next cycle. Participants produce policy briefs and social media strategies using podcasts, videos, webinars, original research articles, online courses, but also in-person advocacy in Brasilia, where they can hold state agencies accountable for critical issues in ocean governance. Since 2019, 8 research action teams self-organize and are working on and learning together. They form the core inter-network ecosystems advancing our transition lab. Please note in the bottom left photo of some of us holding the outputs of 2 transdisciplinary focal groups methods we used. All 8 action research teams have ever since used these methods to steer, so far, 3 interannual cycles of action research. We'll come back to these methods later. In the first series of studies I want to share with you today, we used Francis Westley's and collaborators' theory of transformative agency in linked socio-ecological systems. In these 2 papers, we follow the work by Francis Westley and colleagues, whom were the first to note the potential analytical synergies of combining ecologists Holdings' adaptive cycle with sociologist Dorado's understanding of the 3 basic types of opportunity contexts: hazy, opaque, and transparent. For instance, opaque opportunity contexts have typically few dominant organizations. They are in the conservation phase. are fully institutionalized with widespread and coherent rules, and thus do not provide for opportunities for novelty and change. In 2018, our assessment of the Brazilian federal level ocean governance problem domain indicated an opaque opportunity context, but we found potential pockets of innovation being advanced by the federal government back then. However, in 2019, the new ultra-conservative federal government's taking office caused much backlash in environmental policy and democratic structures, and hence restrained major innovations ever since. Both assessments indicated that PAINEL-MAR, our lab, constituents should help lower the resilience of the dominant undesired regime, convening activities to give sense to collective action, encouraging actors and mobilizing resources across networks. The theory also informed us what types of institutional entrepreneurship strategies, the necessary skills and actions, and types of agency our lab needed in order to become more transformative. Now we turn to the second series of empirical studies, C, D, and E, exploring structural dimensions of ocean sustainability pathways. This is a three-stage assessment of functional ocean governance capacities in Brazil. For all the three papers that will follow, we use Jan Koymans and collaborators' interactive governance theory, whereby governability is the total capacity that a socio-political entity has to govern a system. Governability assessments typically encompass careful consideration of 5 functional capacities of ocean governance systems, such as their interactions, fitness, responsiveness, performance, and power relations. We started by compiling and reviewing documents and minutes from selected ocean governance forums in Brazil to unveil the genesis of a marine spatial planning arena in the country. We identified several phases from the inception in 2011 of the idea of MSP to a later quiescent phase when the agenda seemed to become stagnated in the marine spatial planning pre-planning phase, or step 0 of the MSP in Brazil. We also coded all reported challenges and opportunities appearing in all the minutes against their associated functional governability assessment dimensions mentioned earlier. This helped us unveil structural path dependencies as documented in the trajectories of these governance systems since their origin. The final papers reports on the same research methods used to build up PAINEL-MAR's lab, but now we use to investigate the perceptions of highly ranked governmental authorities through application of 11 focal group sessions with representatives of CIRM's working group on marine spatial planning affairs. Each focal group session was made up of 2 parts. The focal group participants first deliberated on the key elements of their vision for a blue economy in the center of this customized sheet of paper on the left, and around that discussed the inputs, processes, outputs, and results needed to advance marine spatial planning pathways in support of their vision of blue economy. The second step was to complete a participatory network mapping protocol exercise to jointly define what are the most important actors, their interactions, relationships, and how power is distributed in the marine spatial planning arena now and into the future with dotted edges. So we used an adapted version of the evaluative schemes for sustainability transition experiments proposed by Christopher Luederitz and collaborators after a review of over 60 cases of social innovation labs and processes around the globe. This model offers a portfolio of indicators that can be used to monitor the evolution of sustainability experiments. All 471 citations from 11 focus groups were digitalized and coded using the specific modules criteria set and indicators. So we can now see where are the most and least cited evaluative criteria indicators mentioned as critical to foster MSP-based sustainability experiments by relevant authorities. For instance, the principal narrative enacts that the need for outcomes such as actionable knowledge, in turn linked to inputs of specific expertise in the experiment. The paper revealed a largely technocratic view of advancing MSP, predominantly through contributions from spatial data scientists and economists. It is not noteworthy that not much consideration was placed on indicators for accountability, intra and intergenerational equity, transparency, and other critically important topics that should be, and arguably are already important aspects being dealt with in Parnell-Myers Lab internetwork experimentation. We developed a protocol to integrate the perception maps of all focus groups, about half of the members of the federal government think tank forum, into integrated visualizations of the current and future networks. This would be the best collective representation of a complex perception pattern we could possibly achieve of the Brazilian national level governance system. So here is the visualization, the integrated visualization of 11 different focal groups maps. And visualization of public governments, managers' perceptions. Thicker edges, connections, were perceived by a larger number of participants. Larger nodes are perceived as more powerful organizations. On both networks, note that public actors, pink, predominate both in number and in power. Also note the dominance of interactions between public actors and their close relationship to powerful forums under the tutelage of the Interministerial Commission of Sea Resources and the Navy. At network composition level, marine spatial planning is perceived as a governmentally enclosed process with very limited integration of lower governance levels and important known state agents such as small-scale fisherfolk and others. So the paper distills 5 networked ocean governability transformation narratives that I will summarize in the following propositions. I'll start with the questions, what can we do to radically improve the presence and quality of interactions in the ocean governance systems we are immersed in? We need to unveil past trajectories and become better informed to act ourselves as agents of transformations in that system. Experimentation may engage separate knowledge exchange efforts in joint and continued learning interactions. Future network mapping, in turn, may help us envision situated networked pathways so that we can leverage regime shifts. How can we heal unfit policies and actions to become more compatible to the complex realities of ocean policy and social struggle? So one should continuously unveil impediments of integration, but also create space where people can get out of their boxes and engage with imagination of critical institutional changes. Transition labs are key providential here, and participatory network mapping can help lab participants understand and anticipate transformative coevolution of policies and actions that are better capable of dealing with complexity, dynamisms, and the scales and diversity of coastal and ocean systems to be governed. So networks may foster more heterogeneous, permeable, and responsible marine spatial planning arenas to a more diverse knowledge base, where labs will help previously disconnected actors link up and streamline disparate responses. Participatory network mapping makes fragmentation structurally explicit. Hence, potential synergies between disparate innovation response can be made aware of and inspire action. In order to scale up the impacts of isolated innovations that are after similar broader system change, may require enhanced inter-network coordination. Transition labs may help measure the performance of transformative initiatives, while participatory network mapping may help specify what structural changes could improve performance levels. Finally, unveiling past challenges and opportunities for societal participation in ocean governance should set a baseline for upholding critical but proactive participation into the future. Labs engaging with diverse stakeholders may offer a safe relational atmosphere that enables conflict transformation to place out. Participatory network mapping help ocean innovation agents co-design structurally tailored strategies or networked ocean sustainability pathways to confront power asymmetries through learning, planning, and researching together. So this, we have a complete overview of one in many possible approaches to working with pathways to ocean sustainability, and therefore I look forward to our debates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leopoldo. As before, I would like to invite any questions that you may have regarding Leopoldo's presentation on structural transformations towards better ocean governance. Sorry. Any questions? Yes, I see Blessing. You have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Leo, for the very good presentation. My question to you is, you mentioned throughout the presentation you mentioned structural confrontation to power, and I just wanted to know if you could elaborate a little bit further, because I think that is a very important point that we're trying to bring about, but then for us to be able to put it in a regional context to see how we can find solutions to the power play. So if you can explain a little bit on the part of structural, because that comes in main dimensions. So I was just curious to know if there are some solution to that. Thank you.
Power can be measured in networks as a reputational, that the way that people perceive power structures, but also can be measured as an indicator of degree centrality, how connected a particular actor is in the system. Power relations is a classic socio-political aspect of analysis in socio-ecological systems, and largely steers a system towards equity and justice. So there is a debate around marine spatial planning, for instance, in some countries in Europe, that you provide discursive power for people or the agents of change to go there and speak out. But this is not structural power, you're right. For changing structural power is much more pervasive objective. And we need to work with transdisciplinary, complex systems, post-normal science, that we can gather a more contextual, more profound understanding of power structures, but also to put stakeholders together that can visualize more structurally and get to terms of what they mean and what they need to do in terms of changing structural power. It's not. It's a wicked problem. It's not an easy solution. One problem that sometimes is even difficult to formulate and but yeah, many fisher folk, for instance, in Brazil, are aware and are fearful of engaging with some forums, for instance, governance forums, because they think these forums will legitimize a certain blue economy type of vision. And so it's good that stakeholders are always aware and ostensibly are aware of how power interplays in their in blue planning.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Leopoldo, and thank you, Blessing, for your questions. Any other questions from the participants? I see a question from Raki. Go ahead.
Hi, Leo. Thank you. Thanks, girls. Leo, I was wondering, since your project has you've conducted it in Brazil, in the global south, would we be able to take your methodologies and apply it in Africa, for example? You know, would the methodologies be transferable to our region? Thank you.
Thank you, Raki. Well, I've spoke about several methods. One for kicking start the labs, the network by Neomar, for instance. We engaged with an approach which is edu communication. I think it's quite popular it's quite popular in Latin America, an approach that tries to emancipate actors to be able to produce media, to communicate their struggle and to change. So collective action is something that it's everywhere in every point. Of course, citizenship approach, for instance, in Latin America, it's more common to have activists speaking out, and in Latin America, activists and journalists face a lot of trouble speaking out and going to be an activist and advocacy. I don't know how this sort of culture of citizenship it's in Africa and in Asia. Perhaps people are more accustomed to obeying to order, social order, but for sure you find institutional entrepreneurs or people that are change agents. They want to change the status quo everywhere. And but now shifting to the methods, the analytical frameworks, theoretical frameworks, these are mostly European-based frameworks that have been developed by groups studying complex socio-ecological systems in the South. So I think it's compatible. You have to work with different framings, with Southern epistemologies, local native ways of knowing, but also combining with the power of analytical approach, whatever they are. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Leo. And I see that Rachel had a question but couldn't raise her hand. So the question is in the chat. It's about the specific slide called Envision, which I can share my screen so that you see it. So Rachel's questions was about this slide and where the current and future stakeholder networks are mapped. And she's asking if you can please explain why a part of the future network is clustered apart from the rest of the network. So she's talking about that a little bit in the far right of the slide.
So in the protocol, participatory network mapping protocol, we ask also what would be the isolated actors important to the MSP, Marine Spatial Planning arena, now and in the future. The isolated actors are actors that are considered deemed important, but they're not yet connected to the arena itself. So this is why they become isolated in the visualization. And you can see in the future map that one or other becomes connected, but they're still isolated, meaning that government authorities perceive them to remain disconnected. Actually, they had sort of a premonition because we undertook those network mappings before a major political change in Brazil. So they expected back then that the network for advancing MSP would be still self-enclosed. And in fact, it did remain so, also because of the backlashes in democratic structures.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel, for the question. All right, I suggest that we now move on to Victor's presentation. Victor, if you're ready, the floor is yours and you can share your screen.
Thank you, Gilles. Does it work? Can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Great. So thank you very much to Future Earth for organizing this conference. My name is Victor Brun. I'm a PhD student in a lab called CRIOB, and I work in the Philippines on sustainable fisheries. So the goal of today's presentation is to give you an overview both of my research and what we do with Sulubai, the NGO I'm working with for this research. I will not talk so much about my papers because I'm only halfway through my PhD, so I don't have a lot of fancy papers with my name on them, but more about my position in the project and how research is feeding and fed by the work of this NGO. I will talk more specifically about the two projects of Sulubai, so the Sea Academy, which is its main project, and I will discuss also a little bit Shama, a new project that we are launching this year. So first of all, this is the Sharkfin Bay. That's the place in which we are working. So it's based in the north of Palawan in the Philippines. It's about 5,000 hectares. It's a semi-enclosed bay with mostly coral reef and soft bottoms. And it hosts 5 villages with about 7,000 inhabitants. The demography has been booming. It means that most of the people have been starting to come and to migrate in Palawan about 100 to 150 years ago. So it's a recent population, but this increasing population, of course, is having a strong pressure on the resources and is causing us to question on how to improve the sustainability of fisheries there. So most of the population is coastal, lives in these villages, and relies both on fisheries and agriculture for their livelihood. So the first thing we usually do as researchers or as NGOs or even divers, people who are curious about the environment, we observe the effect of environmental threats on coral reefs. So that's the first thing we could see when we dive. I showed you two pictures of some coral reefs in the bay where we are working. First is a pretty healthy colony. So it shows that first some coral colonies and some parts of the reefs are still pretty healthy. And another one is a reef that was blasted by dynamite that we observed. We could quote also other sources of threats, overfishing. So as I said, the demography is dramatically increasing. And with the merchandization of the commodification of fish, people start selling fish. So it starts to have a value and it's causing a huge pressure on the resource. We can also quote some pollution, especially from agriculture, and of course, climate change. We observe several bleaching events, including quite massive ones. So all of these are causing quite a worry for fishing populations because they rely on this resource. That's just an example of dynamite fishing also that we observed. So you can see huge degradation of the reef substrate. On picture C, this is supposed to be under the reef, it's inside the rocks with dead fish around because it was a recent event. And so these environmental stressors can also have huge potential effects on local communities because they rely on ecosystem for food and security, for their livelihood, for coastal protection. So people live in direct interaction with the reef and depend on it as much as they can also threaten it. So this is only to show that if we are to find a solution in marine conservation, it has to be done in accordance with what's happening at the local scale. We must first ask specifically what are the issues there if we want to have an efficient marine conservation able to tackle them. At the same time, which is what we did also, we need to try to understand what makes sense for local people there. Alexandre earlier was talking about the co-design of indicators. And so for us also, it's extremely important to understand what makes sense for people. So we try to bridge this scientific knowledge and the knowledge that people have on environmental degradation and what they call also environmental issues and solutions to make more sense out of it and to have more alignment between some objectives of conservation and the objective that people can have. So then I will say a few words about Sulubai. So Sulubai is the NGO I'm working with that started its work in 2011. So it was created by a French couple who settled on this island, Fred and Chris Tardieu. And when they purchased the island, it was completely destroyed. The trees were cut, the mangrove as well was burnt to make charcoal. So in the first years, what they did was to revegetate the island. So it started really as a very small project on this 4-hectare island to plant trees. They planted, I think, about 60,000 trees and plants, including a lot of mangroves. And after this, slowly, they started to get interested in marine conservation, coral reef restoration, and also the implementation of a marine sanctuary around the island. So slowly seeing that the work had some resonance around local communities, that it was accepted, but also that many people actually were asking for more including fishermen. The main reason being illegal fishing, because most of the fishers are legal fishers and are quite annoyed by the continuing fishing practices of illegal fishermen. So with this, Sulubai slowly decided to extend its scope and to include more the surrounding villages and start a larger project. So this project is called the Sea Academy. It has several goals. I will not discuss everything, but what I am studying more specifically is the creation of 3 community-based sanctuaries around the bay. So you can see a map here with the 3 new sanctuaries. So this one is the old existing sanctuary, which is 5 years old now. And then 3 new sanctuaries, 1 for each village, Depletion, Silanga, and Sandoval. So these 3 MPAs have been now accepted by these villages and will be implemented in the next month, depending on how fast or slow the decision process are going. So I'd like to discuss a few challenges and opportunities we've seen in the implementation of these MPAs. So first, in the challenges, difficult thing is to generate interest and participation in marine conservation. I would say that most of the people I've met and interviewed were pretty interested in marine conservation. Most of them were saying that it could be helpful with the decreasing fish stocks. Most people would see marine sanctuaries as a spawning ground for fish. So protecting the spawning ground would be protecting stocks in the future. But it's not because people understand that it could be interesting or important that people actually participate. So the hard part is to transform this maybe quite theoretical interest into something more practical. And so this is quite a challenge, which is linked also to the second challenge I've written, which is thinking long term. Most fishers are working on a very daily basis, getting food and money for the day. And so thinking about changing practices in the long term to get benefits, but in the future is also a little bit difficult. Then there is the fact of navigating between different languages and culture. You can guess I'm not from the Philippines, and part of the team is also not from the Philippines. So there is first this cultural gap, but I would say even more importantly, there is also a gap between occupations. I'm a researcher. I'm pretty close to the NGO I'm working with, but it's a very different way to work and understand things from, let's say, a fisherman or even a farmer from one of these villages. So the working culture plays a huge effect, and it's a huge challenge in forecasting and planning actions. And then at the same time, we have in this place a few opportunities I could discuss. First, it has been the quite long-term involvement with local communities from Sulubai. So they have been working now over 10 years in this place. And time, of course, has brought some trust. And this trust is very important to discuss together, to organize meetings, and to be better accepted there. Then there is the awareness. I discussed it a little bit. There is quite a huge awareness of resource depletion. So this awareness and the local knowledge people have on their ecosystems is a huge tool, because as a researcher, we have another set of knowledge, another set of tools, but we are talking on the same topic. So this knowledge, this awareness is usually a great way to start conversation. We talk about the same fish, we talk about the same topic, fisheries. And this fact is extremely helpful in the discussions. And finally, I wrote it both in challenges and opportunities. It's the diversity of actors. So the diversity of actors can be difficult because, as I said, it's different cultures. Politics in the Philippines, or law enforcement people or NGOs have different ways of seeing the same issue. So it can be a challenge, but it can also be quite an opportunity or a force in such a project, because it gives different standpoints, and some ideas that are brought on the table by fishers would have never been brought to the table by law enforcement or researchers, let's say. So this diversity is sometimes potentially a little bit conflictual or difficult to manage, but at the same time, it can generate a lot of opportunities to give quite a diverse overlook on what we should do and how we can do it. Then a few words about my role as a researcher. In this project, it is really to assess this, the potential benefits and the actual benefits that we can generate. So I'm studying at the same time ecological and fishery effects. So the first thing, when we put in place a marine sanctuary, once we decided that it would be useful, I said it like the objectives are quite straightforward. It's for fisheries, for food security, because that's what matters most in this case for local people. So we can also say we have a sanctuary just for biodiversity, but this would be a little bit disconnected from the objectives that local people state. So if we want to understand if it works, we first have to look in the sea if it works. So we conduct some ecological and fishery surveys. So you can see on this image, that's a fishery survey, fishery landing. We basically count the fish. Counting these fish will give us some valuable information on the health of the stocks and the evolution in time. The ecological effects, we will conduct some surveys, but underwater. We will count the fish when they're still alive. And we will basically compare protected zones with unprotected zones. And the goal is to see if in the future the fish stocks are getting better, if the ecosystem is also functioning better. Then we also look at changes in the food system. So the changes in the food system would be linked to consumption of fish. So that's the first thing that we will look at. Does the consumption of fish change in time? But it's not the only thing. We also try to look at the other things that people eat. So we try to see if conservation can have an effect on the way that people eat, because many paths actually would be possible and could affect what people eat, how they eat. So we try to look a little bit broader than just the food, let's say, the quantity of fish that fisher folks eat. And finally, we also look at other implications of marine conservation. So we will document, for example, how participation is done, if people really participate, how conflict is managed. And so there is also quite a lot of documentation. If participation doesn't work, that's very important for the NGO to understand why, in order to adapt tools and, let's say, do some other ways of consultation or things like this. And we also look at other dimensions of well-being. And we look at baselines. So that's what I've been doing so far, trying to build some baselines to say this is the state of fisheries, this is the state of food security, and which is already quite useful for a conservation project because it gives us an idea on what we want to act upon. And then we'll study also changes in time, ecologically, but also social changes. That's just an effect of protection. So I will go very quickly on this, but it's the effect of the MPA, that was the marine sanctuary that was created around Pangatalan Island after 5 years. So you can see it had quite strong effects. So higher species richness, in blue it's within the sanctuary. Higher species richness, more abundance, higher biomass, and higher mean sizes, and no real effect on trophic level. So that's just a few indicators showing that this sanctuary has been quite efficient, even if it was only like after 5 years. And then I will finish by presenting quickly a project. So we are launching this new project called CHAMA, which has the role to strengthen the role and the position of local communities in decision-making. So it's linked to the Sea Academy project. The Sea Academy project is mainly about coral reef restoration, I said it, creating marine sanctuaries, but also education with local schools and some help also capacity building with local fisherfolk associations to help them strengthen their own role on managing coastal and marine resources. So the goal of this project is to create a research action platform. So basically what we will do is to train local fishers to dive and to be able to collect ecological data. So sort of citizen science as well. The role is to give them the ability to do it, but also show them what's our work, to show them how we work, the kind of data we are collecting, and why it makes sense to collect this kind of data. Because I said it, we have different working cultures. So it's important for them to be aware of what we are doing if we want to be sitting at the same table and discuss this kind of issue. Then we will conduct some ecological and socio-economic monitoring with them. And then the goal is to write a report on management needs and opportunities. So this will also include workshops and consultations where we will ask fishers and other people from these communities what they think can be done. So we could have like a majority deciding that, for example, banning a kind of small mesh net could be interesting, or huge traps also could be regulated. So I don't know yet what they will propose, but the goal is really to collect their proposition and to make them resonate with the science we've been conducting, and then go to the municipality, because these kind of decisions are taken at the municipality level, and propose some policy change and try to push for policy change with the fishers and towards decision makers. So we'll try for a very specific area on a very specific issue to actually collaborate on creating 1 or 2 new laws linked to fisheries. So this will take 2 years, and we are really waiting forward to start with this process. So that was an overview of what we are doing here. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again to Gilles and the Futures team for their organizing this event.
Thank you, Victor, for this great presentation. Again, I would like to invite questions regarding Victor's presentation before we move to the discussion part of the webinar. We do have 2 questions. I think Clément raised his hand first. So Clément, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, and thanks, Victor, for your presentations. It's good to have news from you. I'm wondering if you do work with children, and especially on education. I understand that one of the big topics on your field is destructive activities by fishermen and by local people. So do you work with children? It seems that with the final project you presented, it's a lot of educating the fishermen themselves. But yeah, what about kids?
So I don't work directly with kids yet. Maybe we'll have some activities where I will participate, but so far I have not been participating really. But Sulubai is working with local schools. It's not really about destructive fishing or education about this. It's more so far a presentation of mangrove ecology, coral reef ecology. It's great to do this because these kids know very well marine ecosystem for many of them. Many of them are children of fishers. So they have reefs just in front of them. So, and mangroves as well. So it's great to be able to discuss this with them. So a huge part was so far to train teachers. And Sulubai has been working first with the teachers to adapt the programs they have and basically show them what they can talk about and give them some materials. So that's the work we'll do. And there should be also for the Sea Academy, a part where kids will come on site and we'll do snorkeling and we'll show them the marine sanctuaries where there is a lot of fish. So it's interesting also for them to see the effects of protection and yeah. So that also will be part of the activities, swimming with the kids.
Thank you, Victor. Sarah, you have a question as well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Victor. That was really interesting. This is Sarah. I'm dialing in from New Zealand. I was really interested in what you said around training local fishers to dive and collect ecological data. And I was just interested in finding out what challenges or biases you may be facing and what the feedback has been from fishers in that transition.
Thank you for our question. So we haven't started yet. We should start at the beginning of July to have some training with the fishers. It will probably be quite challenging. So the first thing we want to do is to give them a proper diving certification. We are working with an NGO called Plongeurs du Monde. It's a French NGO teaching people around the world how to dive. So they have quite some experience and we trust their experience for this. This will be the first challenge. Also, recruiting people who will be there the length of the project will be quite challenging. So that's what we are working on right now. And then I think among the challenges will be the precision of the data we are collecting. So we've been discussing this, especially the taxonomic precision. I think we will find a way because the fishers I've been working with at least have a lot of vernacular names on the fish. Some vernacular names would be only valid for the family. So this will be an issue. We'll see. Parrotfish is a great example. They say molmol for every parrotfish. So how are we going to handle this? Maybe we'll have to stay at the family level, which I guess will be okay. It depends on what we aim at doing with the data. We are also conducting some surveys with our team, so more standard data. But the issues we have is a basic issue of citizen science with people who are not experts really, and trying to get the same precision in data will be difficult. So we'll try to adapt. But the goal again is not to have the best quality of data. It's more about the process and the inclusion.
Thank you.
Great. Next we have Thomas. Thomas, you have a question? Go ahead whenever you want. We cannot hear you. You might be muted. Right. I'm not sure what is happening with Thomas or Thomas Lamy, but we cannot hear you. I suggest that we move to Leo's question while Thomas figures out why his microphone is not working. Leo, go ahead.
Thank you, Gilles. Thank you, Victor, for amazing presentation. I remember when 15 years ago, I was also implementing a ecological monitoring program in a reef fish site with fisher folk in northern Brazil. And back then, there was a lot of expectations from international organizations to kickstart meaningful data flows that could inspire monitoring and management. And I see a lot of conservation initiatives focuses on the management component of the ecosystems, whilst you've interestingly touched upon issues of well-being and that expands beyond the ecological monitoring, which is of course a very important part of your job. So how do you balance expectations with the community? Because in my case back then, I realized I was trying to kind of force the importance of ecological monitoring upon the communities in cases where not even they were not even literated to take account of numbers and so forth. So are there examples of socioeconomic monitoring or other types of policies that your organization can engage with in this kind of win-win collaboration with the community?
So your question is about how to generate interest in the monitoring, right?
There are other examples that goes beyond ecological monitoring that you can work with communities.
So I think the communities have been mostly interested so far in pushing away illegal fishing. So that was a huge part that generated, I think, some interest. A huge part also that has been interesting communities was the help they could get for their their fish folk organizations. So the management organizations that we are working with. So yeah, we've been doing quite a lot of work to assist them in their activities and some capacity building, so they would have more capacity to act and to decide and organize. So this, as I said, we are not talking the same language, or we don't expect the same things, but our interests, I think, are meeting in these organizations, because they have a strong interest in organizing and joining their forces to fight not only illegal fishing, but any regulation that would come, because most of them want these regulations. But the issue is, if only 1 or 2 persons are actually following the rules, it has no benefits. So these organizations are a way for them to say, okay, we will do it together. And so we try to capitalize on this while helping them to organize better. And yeah, these assessments, I think, will be interesting for them in this arena. I don't think so far they really care about the biomass in a marine reserve or things like this. But yes, it will be one part of the challenges if we can generate and show them why it actually matters. So we'll see. I don't know how it will go. It's my first experience also in doing something like this. But yeah, I rely a lot on the experience also of some of my colleagues there.
Thank you. I will take one last question from Thomas before.
Yeah. Does it work now?
It works. We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, Victor. It was very nice to hear from you and listen to your fantastic research you're doing in Philippines. And I had basically only 2 questions. The first one was about the protocol that you used to carry out the fishery and the conception survey. What type of protocol is that? And is it some type of protocol that are also used in other places of the world? And the second one is with respect to the fishery and the fish consumption. Do you see a lot of specificity? Do the fishermen tend to catch everything? And do they also eat everything they catch, or do they select specific species and they tend to maybe sell the high value fishes to restaurant or to hostel or things like that?
Thanks for our question. We could discuss this for hours, so we won't.
Probably, yeah.
The protocol is quite standard for the fishery surveys. I have several type of data collection. The most basic one is surveys. So I go on a place where the fishermen are landing surveys, and identify to the species level, measure, and weight. When I cannot measure and weight everything, I do bundles of fishes about the same size, count the fish, and weight everything. So we have some taxonomic information, weight and size, which is pretty standard. Then I have another way of collecting data, which is much larger scale because it's faster. I just ask fishers where they fished for, like, approximately for how long, the number of kilos they got, and the value of what they sold, where they sold. So it gives us information about CPUE, and that's quite standard. I think everyone has a slightly different way of collecting this data, but in the end, it's the same information: species, size of the fish, where and how it was caught. It has been a little bit difficult for me because I'm alone doing this. So I think I have probably less data than other places, but I try to make it replicable enough and random enough to have enough information to see what I want to see. And then the specificity, the selectivity of the fishery. So it's extremely diverse. I think I observed about 15 to 20 ways of fishing, nets, traps, many different ways of fishing. And it comes with a huge diversity of species caught. And this huge diversity also translates in a huge diversity of fish eaten, which actually we say is great, because the more selective the fishery, the more balanced, and there is less pressure on only one group. And also the fact of eating everything makes the diet more diverse. Different species of fish have different nutrient contents. So it's great also to see a big diversity. There is some selectivity, especially fishers. Fishers would sell first the beautiful fish, the bigger ones, and keep for their family, the smaller one they cannot sell. There is not much sell in markets. A few fishers are actually fish buyers and middlemen, and they would go and sell somewhere else. But I would say it depends actually. In some villages, most of the fish is sold locally, but in some villages, most of the fish is exported by very few people, which causes also some other issues that we don't have to discuss now, but you can imagine.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Victor.
Thanks, Thomas, for your question. I would now like to transition into the discussion part of the session, and actually Tanya's question really will launch us quite nicely into it, because the first question is about the scalability of the different approaches that we've seen so far, from the very structural, transformative, and political approach that Leopoldo presented today, to the much more specific context presented by Victor, and the in-between, the sort of regional to local context that was introduced with Alexandre's presentation. So Tanya's question asks about the balance between scalability to a global scale versus granularity. So I suppose you mean very specifically located, and the need for bigger picture approaches for governance that can be developed, but the risk of losing local contextual issues. How do we balance this risk between, or this challenge between the two different extremes of the scale spectrum? Leo, perhaps you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Tanya. It's a very interesting question. And I don't think there is a blueprint solution for balancing, but I think the way that we look and that we frame complex systems helps us to find leveraging points or places in the system where you can build up and scale things. So this is a classical question in marine conservation and marine governance. You have in one side to set strategic objectives at the higher levels, but also you need to leave room for social participation, institutional learning to occur. So whether this negotiation compliance comes from the top and this institutional learning and participation comes from the bottom, it's a living system, and you need to be aware that this is ongoing. So there is a framework for that's called hierarchical polycentric governance approach, where you have quasi-autonomous systems, decentralization, trying to reach the solution where the problem emerged. So this sort of discussions in governance science. Our paper, the last paper, talks about us finding a meso-level coordinating place. For instance, Brazil is quite huge, and you have this local activities or innovation, area-based innovation approaches going on, MPAs, other effective area-based conservation measures, OECMs they called, on the ground. So you need to find room, a meso-level room, so they can come together. Labs are a good approach for disparate and separate initiatives to come together, be more reflexive and conscious about the needed changes. And from then on, you can build up understanding and collective action, and eventually scale up, scale out, scale deep. There are many ways of framing this question. So yeah, I would say to leave room for negotiated compliance with institutional learning and participation, the way we balance this. Thanks.
Thank you, Leo. Victor, would you like to give it a go as well?
I honestly don't have much to say about this. My experience so far is extremely local, and we can see a few ways in which the higher scale would manifest. A set of actors, a set of regulations, but I would say in our case, most of what's happening is happening at a very local level. So higher scale would be mostly constraints, I would say. That's how we view it, and I think that's how we experience it. I'm not saying it's bad. It's very important to have this kind of constraint, because it's checking that we are not doing everything at this scale. And so yeah, I think that's how we can consider it, but I don't have much to add actually to what Leopoldo was saying.
Thanks, Victor. Would anyone else who's present on this call would like to perhaps contribute to answering this question based on their experiences or knowledge of those cross-scale interactions that can happen quite often in those types of pathways-oriented projects? Oh, I see there's a question from Yiska van Dijk. This was to Alexandre, but unfortunately, I think Alexandre has left the call, and so has Louis. They were both part of the PACPATH project. So I don't know. Yiska, maybe you want to take the mic and oh, it was Leo. Go ahead, then perhaps you can take the mic and ask the question directly.
Yes, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it was in reflection to Leo. He mentioned the hierarchical governance framework, but he said a name, which I didn't quite get. So if you could type that in the chat.
Leo, did you hear the question?
I didn't hear, but from what she's asking on the chat box, it's called hierarchical polycentric co-evolutionary governance approach. Peter Jones from University College London published a book on MPA governance, governing MPAs, marine protected areas. There you find his view of polycentric, hierarchical, and co-evolutionary. Polycentric because you have decentralization of autonomy given, but also you need to more stable strategic objectives to avoid parochialism, the perils of parochialism, and coevolutionary because you need to find space, or they are always evolving with each other. For instance, Victor's MPA site in one side of the island could promote exchanges with fisherfolk and officers from another MPA site and form a network where they can exchange ideas. Actually, there are networks of MPAs established in the Mediterranean, for instance. MedPan is a very interesting initiative where they take the officers and exchange and dialogue, build knowledge, practical solutions. And so it's kind of a laboratory for innovations in how you govern marine protected areas.
Okay, thank you. So it was Peter. The book was from Peter.
I will paste the reference in the chat box in a minute.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for this clarification, Leo. Any other questions or comments regarding that scalability aspect? If not, then we have another interesting question in the chat from Blessing. And perhaps Blessing, will let you formulate it out loud to the different participants, if you are able to.
Thank you. Yes, I've been following Alexandre's presentation, and I was intrigued that they're trying to put some indicators to the SDGs. And now my question, to be precise, is that we normally have the traditional way of collecting data where organizations come in, they take the knowledge from the knowledge holders, and then they use it for decision making. But then I wanted to know, with this project, is there any difference? Are we going to recruit the local people, or are we going to make them part of the project, or for eventual ownership? Not the traditional way where we are having organizations coming in and taking knowledge from the traditional people, and then they use the indigenous knowledge for decision making. And also, the bigger question is, in some areas, like I'm speaking at a local level, where we have the police doesn't support, say there's no police currently on core design, on core ownership or core design. How are we going to circumvent that? And also, if there is another organization which is already working in the same area, are we going to partner them? How do we handle the differences? I just saw a project that is having some of this problem. That's why I asked. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess the question is interesting on a general level. Alexandre, who gave the first presentation, had to leave the session, so he will not be able to answer to this question directly. But perhaps it's also quite relevant for Victor, who works with local communities, and there is definitely an intention to not just to utilize, but I guess to empower local community knowledge as a way to reach sustainable goals. So perhaps Victor, you can speak to this, and then Leo, if you have anything that you would like to add as well, because I think you've also worked with quite a few stakeholders. That would be good. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, very interesting question and critical topic. The kind of information we get, how we get them, and how we try to keep ethical while getting information. I think I've experienced both sides. The first part of my PhD especially was getting information from people. That's the annoying researcher going around the village and asking a lot of questions to everyone. So this is more one way, actually. I'm going there, people have no real interest in giving me information. So the least I can do is to, well, respect some ethical considerations, be nice and friendly, and and be sure that it's a nice moment, so everyone is happy about this. So I haven't really had any issues with this, but it was indeed one way. People providing me information and me mixing all this information the way I want. So of course there is always a lot of bias when we do this. And it's our role as scientists to know this bias and to act on them to create some proper science. So that was more the first part of my PhD, really one way, me getting information from people and giving back sometimes, but also one way, no real co-construction. The same way the NGO was working was more towards one side, listening when people had to talk, and for example doing some consultation to hear what people have to say about for example the creation of MPAs, and then slowly we are trying to get to more co-creation. So that's part of the CHAMA project that we are working on. And in this case, it should be more co-creation. It means we are going to ask some questions. We are going to ask also local fisherfolk association to ask some questions that are interesting for them. And then the policy tools we want to create should be coming from both information that we provide and that these fisherfolks provide. So this should be more of a co-construction. And I see a question in chat about ethical clearance. No, we are not really required to get an ethical clearance, but we have with the CNRS an ethical chart that we have to respect. So these are the rules that we have to respect. So yeah, hope I responded to the whole question.
Thanks, Victor. Leo?
Yes, so I will start with the last part on the ethical clearance. It's something that annoys me quite a lot in Brazil, is that we as marine social scientists, when we go and talk to local communities and engage with local ecological knowledge, traditional knowledge, we are required, and for sure it's an important part of our jobs to go through the clearance. But on the other side, when you are, for instance, a consulting company in Brazil, and there are so many examples of big infrastructure licensing company teams that are going out there and interviewing and collecting data information from perception of stakeholders, and at the end of the day, they become lobbyists of the entrepreneurs. It's quite common, something that annoys me quite a lot. Another example of misuse of information, it's in the Abrolhos Bank, the coral reef system in Brazil, the largest one in the South Atlantic Ocean. And there for almost 10 years, there have been fisheries monitoring schemes through marine conservation NGOs, the sort of scheme that Victor is engaged with. And the data workflows were going to the universities, and eventually there was a high-level commission in Brasilia, capital very far from the sea, and they used that data to design a network of NPAs, and which was advanced, designated on a top-down approach, and that created such a reaction for in the public auditions for the creation of the NPAs. Fisherfolk would just come in buses and would not. So this is a bad use of information. You see, the fisherfolk felt that they had been giving this information out, and at the end of the day, that information was used to prejudice them. It's quite terrible when that happens, because trust is vital for all of our marine conservation activities. For instance, in Painel Mar, where we are creating this network of networks, a new layer of complexity is that it's put on top, because if you're a network, you have your identity, your way of doing, but if you're a network of network, then you have to articulate and respect and engage with different ways of information flows and rules for using them and so forth. So you need to be even more aware that, for instance, you cannot speak for fisher folk if you're a network, but you can. It's get the fisher folk network and bring on the table, let them be aware and speak for themselves. There are so many dimensions to this question. Thanks for raising this.
Thank you, Leo. Any reactions or follow-up questions from the participants? If there aren't any at the moment, then I think Raki's question about ethical clearance and what you were talking about, Leopoldo, towards in your last intervention was it was quite a nice lead into our second question, which had to do with the positionality of researchers in those transformation-oriented projects, especially when working with local communities and asymmetrical power relations, so working with people that perhaps are underrepresented politically and trying to enable them more to have a voice. You were talking earlier, I'm sorry, Leo, about the need to build a capacity and to become catalysts for transformation. And I was thinking, how do you incorporate this? And this is a question to all the participants who are on this session, who also engage in this type of projects. How do you integrate that into your research practices? For example, Victor, you just mentioned the particular bias that you might have as a researcher collecting data, and how you need to acknowledge it and sort of address it in order to get to vigorous science. So perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more on what is that process that you're talking about that can mitigate bias. Yeah, it's quite an open question. You can approach it any way you're comfortable. Victor, maybe you can start.
So yeah, that's a difficulty we are facing, because I'm both a researcher and I work with the NGO. So when I'm going to ask questions and to conduct interviews in the villages where I'm working, I have to explain what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and at the same time, I want people to not consider me so much as an NGO representative. I want them to be free to be critical, even if needed, against the NGO, against regulations. I want them to be able to tell me that they are dynamite fishermen, for example. So it's a position where ethically I have to be clear about my position and my job. And at the same time, I need to get proper answers. So it usually takes a while to really discuss and put people like in a more trust situation, give them the confidence to respond to me as they want. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can feel that the information, that the way people are talking is not totally free, that they want to give some information, and some information they prefer to retain. So I think it's a lot of effort to make before and during interviews, after as well when we present the results. But sometimes it just doesn't work. And so we need to be quite attentive at the moment where we do the interview to see if people are actually being honest, how they consider us. So it's always trying to find a balance, but also in terms of positionality, which is quite difficult. It's kind of the other way, coming in a place as an NGO representative, but also being a researcher. So it's difficult, for example, sometimes to explain to politics. I represent an NGO, but I'm not directly working for the NGO. I'm a researcher, and when I'm talking about a topic, it's with maybe more expertise than more people in an NGO sometimes. So it's a little bit difficult sometimes to navigate, And same as Leopoldo said earlier, there is no blueprint. I don't think there are particular rules to do it properly. Usually it's we discover and we try to navigate with experience. And I'm sure it also depends a lot on the place where we are working.
Leo, perhaps you'd like to comment on this as well.
Yeah, thanks. As a trained oceanographer, I faced a lot of difficulties navigating interdisciplinarity and more in the past 10 years, transdisciplinarity, where you have more blurred identities in the process of knowledge co-production. Of course, you cannot control what others think of you, but you can always be loyal, transparent, and honest about what you're doing. But nevertheless, there are expectations towards sustainability scientists, many times expectations for the authority of science. So people think that we should have clear answers for everything. And as sustainability scientists, I like to think myself as a knowledge broker. So to raise awareness of different impacts of alternatives, of different pathways, if you will, or different ways of doing. So instead of giving easy answers, of course, also the issue of either if you are an activist or a lobbyist or an advocacy activist, lobbyists, that are slight differences in these ways of doing. But to be a broker would be to offer the interlocutor more alternatives for thinking. I think there is a lot of talk about citizen science, and there is a level, a human level, where people are the same. They're citizens and they produce knowledge. What we need to be trained as sustainability scientists to have, I think, epistemologic agility to be able to communicate and with all subjectivities with different people, but also to have methodological groundness. It doesn't matter if you can speak to many others, but if your science is not methodologically robust, for that you have also ways of like defining principles. And science is not value free. So I think for sustainability sciences, it's more natural that we have positions. Actually, sustainability experiments have directionality. They should have directionality. Otherwise, they become neutral, impartial elements in the system. So once Pinelmar, for instance, starts saying that we are after equality, justice, then some sort of actors would not be so happy with us, because they've been lobbying and doing all the things by themselves, representing the interests by themselves. So there is always tension also. You cannot avoid tension, not be a neutral, impartial scientist. Also annoys me when I see, when I read, for instance, a environmental impact assessment, like big chunks of material produced by multidisciplinary teams, and they all have the PhD names like 30, 40, but they do not participate in the analysis of the impact. They just do small parts of components of that study, and in the end, the consultancy agencies say that that knowledge, that conclusion, is based on authority from many people when they did not participate on the final analysis of impacts. There's something that also happens a lot in Brazil. So yeah, I'll stay with that.
Thanks, Leo. I see we got a comment in the chat from Gauthier Daubigny, who's telling us about how representatives of local communities involved in a project that he's working on explicitly wanted to conduct surveys themselves. Perhaps Gauthier, you can expand on this if you are able to use your microphone.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Just to share our experience in Benin, which is nothing to see with oceans, but it's about rodents and earth in slums. And actually, people are quite aware that when you come as a scientist, and especially when you are a stranger in the community, I mean, information won't come so easily, and maybe in a different shape, maybe wrong shape. And so they were so it was so obvious for them that they asked us to think about a way to have them doing the surveys. We are not talking about, of course, the lab stuff, but I mean, and even the sampling stuff. But they really ask us to be the less we could on the field. And for example, now they do all the surveys by themselves, what we call the knowledge, attitude, perception surveys. And so it takes some time to accompany them, work with them, kind of teaching them how to do these surveys. Maybe there are some mistakes made on the field, but I think it's a good way to balance and have a good compromise between scientific data, which obviously seems to be quite good, and maybe the kind of truth coming out from the people they are questioning. But maybe it's not feasible everywhere and in any time. And these are communities that we know for a long time now, and that may be also the secret. Spend some time with them and having, you know, bridge resource people that can interface between academics, operational stakeholders, and local communities. I think this is really important.
Thank you, Gauthier. Any other comments or follow-up questions regarding this topic?
Yes, so I think that it's very important. I agree that communities are involved with collecting data and monitoring their realities, transforming their realities. But it's a challenge to us. I think for getting support, long-term support for this sort of initiative. My experience here is to see many of these initiatives, they start, and whenever resources stop flowing in for things stop. So that's why I like thinking that networks can bring more long span horizons. In many places we lack external agents such as extensionists that can mediate between the community and the methodological groundedness that I mentioned, or mediate and be constant supporters of local initiatives. And so, yeah, I think I resonate with the forum. One of the papers that is listed there calls for a tenfold increase in sustainability science. So we need a lot of resources. We need to invest a lot in co-design and co-implementation. We have the Ocean Decade now talking about co-design, but still very limited participation of social marine scientists, for instance, and not a lot of attention for citizenship yet. I think there's a lot of ocean literacy stuff going on. So bombarding people with information produced at the high level about the importance of ocean, sensitizing people about the importance of ocean on different principles, but to empower people to be more media and information literate and be part of the change. This is a different approach that I still expecting ocean literacy initiatives to advance upon. But then we have media information literacy, edu-communication in Latin America, whereby you support the emancipation of local agents, popular communicators on the ground. It's focused on their empowerment to intervene in their realities, to edit their world.
Thanks very much, Leo. And it looks like we only have 3 minutes left for the session. So it's going to be time to wrap up already. I'd like to thank our 3 speakers, Alexandre, who had to leave early, Leopoldo Gerhardinger, and Victor Brun for their excellent presentations and contributions to this discussion part, as well as to all of the participants present during this session for their questions and for their comments. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.